Welcome to our podcast, What's Up India. Here, we have light and insightful conversations about energy efficiency and sustainability. So, get comfortable, grab a coffee, and tune in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of our energy podcast, What's Up India, where we will be chatting with experts to dive into pressing questions around energy efficiency and India's sustainable future. My name is Anirudh Bhattacharjee. I'm a researcher with Climate Trends. And in this episode of the podcast, my guest today is Prima Madan, who is the International Director, Cooling and Energy Efficiency with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Prima has worked extensively on reducing emissions from air conditioning and refrigeration. She has also spearheaded multiple very important projects, such as designing a national level fund for energy efficiency with the International Institute for Energy Conservation and developing financing mechanisms to promote energy efficiency all across India. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Prima.
Thank you, Anirudh, and very nice to be here and talking about a very pertinent topic today. So, thanks for having me.
So, Prima, I wanted to start with this context of extreme heat because the Indian Meteorological Department, the IMD, released a statement a few days ago saying that India was likely to experience 10 to 20 days of extreme heat this summer. This is essentially a concerning matter because India usually tends to experience 4 to 8 days of extreme heat. So clearly, climate impacts are building up in frequency and intensity. Also, I read a statistic that was quite interesting to me. It said that nearly 75% of India's workforce, that is around 380 million people, they are exposed to heat during their working hours. Now, with the likelihood of heat waves getting worse every year, I wanted to understand your point of view about what you think India's employers can do so that their labor force or their employees are protected from the worst impacts of heat during the warmest parts of the day. And would you say that moving the work hours to, let's say, a more morning focused or a more evening focused time would be a solution, or should employers look into setting up cooled resting stations? What kind of solutions and strategies would you say may be useful in the Indian context?
Thanks, Anirudh. I think you bring up a very important topic, and this really comes under the occupational health and safety that the employers must ensure to their workers, and bringing in the implications of heat that heat has on the health of the workers and productivity is extremely important. There are strategies that can help employers prepare workplaces to provide those solutions to the workers. As you rightly mentioned, altering the work schedules, moving from morning to evening hours. That's one way of ensuring that they are not exposed to extreme heat in those peak extreme heat hours of afternoon and maybe also towards the noon. So modifying work schedules, as you rightly mentioned, is one. Then arranging frequent rest periods with breaks in shaded or air conditioned areas is also extremely important. So ensuring the infrastructure that the employers provide to these workers have some solutions where there are shaded or air conditioned areas, if possible, to allow some breaks. And then also looking at workloads. I think looking at workloads, especially during what we call as an extreme heat day, would be extremely important. And looking at gradually increasing workloads in that kind of a scenario and allowing more frequent breaks for workers during those extreme heat days, and providing them time to adapt to the extreme heat situation. So I think there needs to be more of these. I would like to call it more of these empathetic attitude towards workers, where employers can bring that in. Other thing I also really wanted to highlight here is that ensuring that there is adequate cooling and ventilation in our public infrastructure. So when workers use that public infrastructure, while in their transit to while reaching work. Even in like schools, hospitals, and other public infrastructure, that will be extremely important as well to ensure there is safety of these workers. And the third aspect that I wanted to really bring in is also, I think it lies on the onus of employers to make their employees understand about the heat related impacts and illnesses. So, giving them some sensitivity around what would a heat stroke feel like. You need to be more careful, keep yourself hydrated. This is an extreme heat period that we are witnessing. Therefore, building their capacity and understanding that they need to take care of themselves during this time, and ensuring that kind of training and awareness is kind of given to the workers would also be very important. So these are some solutions that could be adopted by employers.
Very good points you bring up, Prima. And I hope that occupational health and safety finds more prominence in the Indian workplace, especially for people that are out working outside and are exposed to direct sunlight. That is very, very important for them. You brought up the point of cooled resting stations, and when we talk about cooling, the first image that comes to my mind is that of an air conditioner. At the same time, ACs tend to be, like I said, very energy intensive, and
Mhm.
there is a lot of work going on, not just in India but around the world, on reducing their power consumption.
Mhm.
India, of course, has done a lot in terms of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency star rating program,
Mhm.
because the ACs tend to be one of the most power hungry appliances in any
Mhm.
house or office.
Mhm.
Um, Also, recently I read about, I think it was three American firms that are reporting innovations in air conditioners. What they're doing is that they're separating the dehumidification of the air from the cooling of the air. And by doing so, they are claiming that they have reduced the air conditioner's power consumption by as much as 50 to 90%. If that is true, that is significant improvement on an AC's performance. Now, just to understand from your experience in this field, having worked for many, many years in energy efficiency and reducing the power consumption of air conditioners, would you know of any technologies or any manufacturers that are working along similar lines for India? Are they
Mhm.
developing any products, well, air conditioners really, that are specifically suited to the Indian conditions of high
Mhm.
heat and humidity?
Mhm.
And if not, would it be useful for us to make certain recommendations, reach out to these manufacturers, and talk to them about the changing climatic conditions of India and how, therefore, the technology also needs to evolve?
Mhm. Very relevant question again, Anirudh. And just talking about air conditioners, I mean that if when we talk about the global cooling challenges, we have to get the air conditioner right,
Mhm.
especially in the context of countries like India and Indonesia, where there's going to be a large, a skyrocketing increase of air conditioners. And just to give you a number, like as the planet heats up, we would need 3 billion more air conditioners that are expected to be installed by 2050. So, and a large part of those are going to be in India. So,
Mhm.
the relevance of this equipment in the Indian context is of paramount importance. To answer your question, and you rightly pointed out on newer technologies which are talking about dehumidification and looking at, the wet bulb temperatures that you mentioned before. There is work that is going on in this direction in India. There are Indian manufacturers that are thinking about it. And I'll tell you why I say so, because a couple of years back there was an initiative that was launched by under the mission innovation by Department of Science and Technologies, as well as RMI and some other groups,
Mhm.
which was called as a global cooling price. The global cooling price was basically, focused on developing innovative air conditioner, a room air conditioner, which has 5x less climate impact, both in terms of energy consumption as well as the refrigerant that it used.
Mhm.
The good part is that it was an we can say it was a global challenge, but very India focused. And there were quite a few of Indian manufacturers that participated and also made it to the finalist list.
Mhm.
So, to answer the question, that yes, there is work being done, there is research and development that is being done in this area to develop these India suited, locally suited air conditioners and technologies. Uh, so I would say that while the work has been initiated, but a lot needs to be done. To bring these technologies to market, there needs to be a revision of current test standards which are applied to these equipment, because the way the test standards are right now, it doesn't look into the moisture and humidification in the way that these technologies would need in the future.
Mhm.
So those need to be updated.
Mhm.
Also, the affordability of these appliances. Like India and most of the developing world, extremely cost sensitive market, and we are talking about providing access to cooling to a large part of the Indian population. We need these equipments to be affordable.
Mhm.
So we need to get into aspects of ensuring that these technologies are made affordable. So there needs to be more work in that direction. A lot of groundwork has already started in terms of testing protocols for these equipment. More manufacturers need to come in to develop variants of these technologies and look at ways that the cost can be brought down. So the answer is yes, but a lot more needs to be done.
Absolutely. Just as a brief follow up question to that, Prima, you said that a lot of work has already happened, but have any of these products actually been commercialized and released into the market yet?
No, no, they haven't been.
Okay.
They're still in a prototype mode. There needs to be revision of test standards, as I
Mhm.
mentioned before, that these could be brought into market. They are not in a phase of being commercialized or brought to a market in any way, but there is a vision to get these out in the market in the next couple of years.
Okay, and it could not have come sooner because the IEA just recently said that India's electricity consumption from air conditioners alone has risen by 21% between
Mhm.
2019 and 2022. So
Yeah.
that's an enormous increase in a period of just 3 to 4 years.
Mhm.
And the prediction is that by 2050, residential air conditioners in India will consume as much power as all of the African continent consumes today. So we can just imagine the scale of power needed to fuel India's cooling ambitions. Um, Speaking of affordability, Prima, again, you bring up a very good point. Now, it's common knowledge that India is not yet a developed country, although we are working very hard towards getting there. And as much as I would assume many of our listeners are able to afford high efficiency appliances, the reality is that most of India cannot. A large demographic in this country is forced to buy secondhand or used air conditioners for their space cooling needs. Um, and this can be especially a problem in humid cities like,
Mhm.
let's say, Kolkata, where I would imagine that a ceiling fan or a desert cooler does not really tackle the problem of dehumidifying the place enough to make it comfortable. It may lower the temperatures, but the humidity may still be uncomfortably high.
Right.
Um, and also, having spoken to people in this field, we understand that this demographic tends to live in rather cramped conditions where there is very poor ventilation between buildings.
Mhm.
So I would think that this affects the AC's performance and just the cooling efficiency. And as a consequence, the amount of electricity that and the amount of electricity that is consumed by the AC and the electricity bill is relatively higher for this user group. Um, Ideally, I would think 4 to 5 star ACs, 4 to 5 star rated ACs um, would be the best possible solutions, but they are still very expensive. Um, would you suggest or would you recommend any active or passive cooling techniques for this demographic so that they are able to meet their cooling needs as well as keep affordability in mind.
Yeah. Very relevant, again, Anirudh. When we at NRDC, when we talk about cooling or building resilience to extreme heat, we start with the impact on the vulnerable communities, providing them the access to cooling because they are most exposed to the challenges of heat and climate impacts. So addressing their needs, I think, is something which needs to be prioritized. And you rightly mentioned that most of the infrastructure that they stay in or live in is not apt to provide that kind of cooling that an air conditioner could provide. Many times, an air conditioner could not even fit in these kinds of homes. And of course, because of affordability, these homes are mostly restricted to a ceiling fans or a desert cooler. Uh, some of the solutions that could be applied in these housing areas or these dwellings is passive cooling solutions. And I would like to classify these solutions in two categories. One category is where the household itself can take some steps to make its living condition more better, provide thermal comfort. And other is more at a larger community level, at a neighborhood level, that those interventions would be required. At a household level, solutions such as cool roofs, which is mostly consisting of applying a solar reflective material on your roof, which kind of leads the roof to absorb less heat, and therefore helps to keep the indoor temperatures lower. Now, these solutions have led to an indoor door. There are various studies. There are various field studies that have been conducted. There are actual implementations that have been analyzed at a household level in low income housing, in air conditioned buildings as well, where these solutions have led to a decrease or a lowering the temperatures by 2 to 4 degrees, an indoor temperature. So it's a very effective strategy, so to say, and it's also cost effective because there are the various kinds of materials that can be classified as cool roofs or cool roof materials, such as a solar reflective paint, a membrane, often also cool tiles that are available, and there is a varied price range. And as and when these are being scaled up, the prices are coming down. This is one solution that can be applied. And in fact, NRDC has been working on scaling up cool roofs solutions across states and cities through policy interventions and working with policymakers to ensure the scale up happens. Because that's a very kind of a win-win solution. Um, in addition to this, shading, ensuring there's some sort of shading that can be included, whether it's a natural tree cover or a canopy that is used by some of these homes, is also another solution when it gets classified under passive. At a neighborhood level, nature-based solution, the right tree planting that will help bring down the temperatures at a neighborhood level or make the dwelling more comfortable. And then, typical solutions that we say during an extreme heat event, which are often the part of heat action plan, is to build the capacity of these communities to cope with extreme heat. Uh, while you mentioned that, air conditioners, and that's why, in the earlier part of the conversation, I mentioned that air conditioner and affordability of an air conditioner going forward to reach this population would be very, very important. Uh, Passive cooling solution combined with ceiling fans or desert coolers can provide relative thermal comfort. And I would like to emphasize here, while you mentioned that it may not be sufficient to have a ceiling fan or a desert cooler, ceiling fan is really an equipment of necessity in India. It's in every home. It's pretty much in every home. So energy efficiency of that equipment itself is also very important, and improving the performance of that technology in terms of better airflow, using less energy, providing a greater comfort, also holds a lot of potential, especially for these students. So there is movement in this direction to ensure this technology itself achieves super efficiency while improving its performance, while improving the airflow that these equipments can provide, and therefore lead to that being able to provide that thermal comfort. So it's a combination of passive and active that could be combined to give that access to cooling uh, to these vulnerable communities in particular.
Excellent. I'm really happy to hear that there is so much work happening with this demographic because, yes, the exposure that they have to go through in terms of direct heat exposure, that is quite high. And um, having access to high performance ceiling fans or efficient air conditioning would really
Mhm.
make a huge difference in their lives. So I'm really happy to note that there is so much progress here. Prima, you talked about just the passive cooling techniques. Now, being India, we have a wealth of knowledge in terms of using natural materials and natural building techniques to achieve passive cooling. It's been in our heritage way
Mhm.
before electricity was a part of the country.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. Now, as I'm sure my viewers will know, that the government has initiated the Global Housing Technology Challenge, and this is an initiative under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. The idea is to bring the world's very best construction techniques and construction principles to India and apply it to India's mass housing projects. The thinking is that India should be able to minimize the cost of construction while at the same time speeding up um, the rate of construction so as to extend affordable housing to as many people within the
Mhm.
shortest time spans possible.
Mhm.
Um, Over here, I wanted to ask you about just the use of natural materials. Let's say mud or clay or sand, or
Mhm.
even using lime plaster instead of polymer-based paints.
Mhm.
These have been part of India's architectural heritage for centuries.
Mhm.
I wanted to understand how you would think they can be applied, if they can be applied, to India's mass housing projects. And if
Mhm.
they can be, keeping in mind the idea of maximizing the cooling potential of these projects,
Mhm.
which are the technologies that you would most prioritize, and which are the ones that you think are most scalable and cost effective in the Indian context?
Mhm. Sure. Um, I think the way the construction is happening in India, we often use this term that nearly, it used to be 70%. Before that, 70% of buildings that will exist in India by 2030 are yet to be built.
Mhm.
And now number has come down to 50% given the construction that has already happened in the last couple of years. So there is a lot of new construction that is to happen in a fast developing country, India. Um, there is a lot of recognition of the concept that you just said, that a lot of the ancient architecture in India was based on strategies for reducing incoming heat and therefore requiring less of cooling.
Mhm.
Uh, there is active work in architectural spheres that are exploring that how some of these strategies could be adopted. Now, here I would like to mention that there's something called as a vernacular architecture that was being used previously. Uh, there are ways that one is looking at strategies how that can be applied. Now, vernacular architecture was relevant when the buildings were of up to 3 stories. And when we talk about mass housing projects, multi-story buildings now in the newer development phase, how this will be applied is need to be thought through in a better way. It may
Mhm.
not be directly applicable. Different techniques could be adopted out of this and applied, and also using like locally available material, as you rightly mentioned, to construct these buildings. This, of course, brings down the cost and also improves the sustainability. But given the new architecture style, this needs to be thought through. What I would like to mention over here is that we need strong solutions when these buildings are being thought through, right from the design phase. So when we talk about uh, passive cooling strategies that need to be adopted. One needs to take decisions about the building form, the orientation, the shading, the ventilation at the early design stage when these buildings are conceptualized, because these have a significant impact on the energy use of the building. So that has to be the starting point when we talk about constructing these mass dwelling units. And then comes in that how do we ensure that there is external shading, glazing, and natural ventilation in these buildings that ensures that there is less of heat retention and and less of cooling need. You mentioned about clay and you mentioned about some of these materials. In fact, when we talk about cool roofs, we also encourage um, developers and where possible, there used to be these clay pots that were used in the in earlier years, which were inverted clay pots put across the roof, uh, in closely tied up together, and that was pretty much used as a technology to reduce the retention of heat on these roofs. So using some of those techniques, of course, these all will need to be modified in the current context
Mhm.
and applied. But looking at the passive design right from the conception design phase, looking at orientation, ventilation, and using some insulation for these buildings would be important, and reducing the energy demand. And in this context, I would really like to talk about two things. One is that India has had a very proactive energy efficiency program, which has been led by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency under the Energy Conservation Act of 2001.
Yeah.
In 2007, India released the Energy Conservation Building Code,
Yeah.
uh, which was for the commercial buildings. I know your question is more in the context of housing,
Mhm.
but a couple of years back in 2021, India released the energy code for residential building. It's called ENS. It's the Eco Niwas Samhita
Yeah.
that looks at building envelope, HVAC, heating, ventilation, air condition requirements, and these are basically codes that are looking at minimum energy efficiency performance of these buildings.
Mhm.
Uh, and parameters. So applying those ENS strategy in itself and adopting them as part of these mass housing programs is a very good starting point,
Mhm.
because these codes have been designed keeping the Indian conditions in mind, and looking at the architectural solutions that have been available widely or previously been used. So applying these building energy codes and adopting them as part of, for example, the Prime Minister's housing scheme programs at the national and at state level would be one way to go. And the second part that I wanted to talk about that is the government recognizes this at the national level also, the role of passive cooling in the construction going forward. India released the India Cooling Action Plan in 2019, which was one of the first almost globally, which recognizes cooling, and it has really mainstreamed cooling uh, across departments in the government and has raised the profile of cooling at the national level, which was not existent before. Um, and it has specific targets, which talks about cooling load reduction targets, like reducing the cooling demand, because that has to be your first step of about 25% by 2037, 38.
Mhm.
Then it talks about reducing cooling energy demand as well, and then has a component of providing servicing and training the workforce to these techniques. The plan itself recognizes the role of some of these traditional solutions that can be applied and prioritized when one looks at the space cooling needs of the country. So I just wanted to kind of also highlight that initiative. And it talks about, it really has recommendation in short, medium, and long term,
Mhm.
which correlates some of these solutions, cooling solutions and strategies to the government programs that are existing. One such that you just mentioned a
Mhm.
couple of months back. Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. The India Cooling Action Plan, popularly known as ICAP, I think it was recognized as one of the world's most comprehensive cooling action plans, and it was quite a groundbreaking initiative by the center. So that was really quite a step forward for India. You mentioned about the heat action plans, Prima. You know, Ahmedabad in India was the first city to come out with its own heat action plan, and that was back in 2013. Since then, more than 200 cities have come up with their own heat action plans, and as summer approaches, we are getting into um, steps like installing sprinklers across the cities, or setting up cool wards in hospitals, or even demolishing abandoned buildings to reduce the heat island effect. But given India is such a big country with such a huge population, and yet it is a part of the global south, do you see a role for international climate finance in helping India achieve its cooling targets? I ask this because India has taken a leading role in negotiating with the global north for climate funding. But do you think there should be a specific pitch to garner funds for India's battle with extreme heat and humidity, and its efforts to build resilience against extreme heat and humidity? And if so, do you think there should be any specific research or any other investigation that needs to happen specifically in this field that can be presented to the global north or multilateral funding agencies? How do you see the role of international finance in this sphere?
Yeah. Um, Finance, I think, is extremely important when we come up talking about these solutions. You mentioned about heat action plans. We have been working on heat action plans since 2013 with the Ahmedabad city. NRDC was one of the pioneer groups working on this, and since then it has scaled to over 100 cities, as you rightly mentioned.
Mhm.
The implementation of these plans, the capacities at state level to implement these plans is very limited. There needs to be more capacity at the state level, at the city level, to actually use these plans as tools to build resilience of the population. So finance plays a very key role, both national finance and also international finance, as you rightly mentioned. One way of looking at is also, if heat was to be part of the conversation, and this is something that we are trying to prioritize as part of the fund that was announced as in COP27, much progress in COP28.
Mhm.
So featuring heat as part of those conversations would be important to ensure some allocation of funding to the rising challenge of extreme heat. And there is work that is happening at national level to ensure like or dialogues that have started in this direction at the national level in India. So that's one way of tapping. I would like to also mention a number. World Bank recently had published a report on investment needs in the cooling sector in India, and they came up with a number of within the space cooling itself, there is an investment opportunity of $1.6 trillion by 2030. So
Wow.
that's the
Yeah.
kind of money that is really needed.
Mhm.
And this money is needed in terms of research and development, in terms of building capacities, building tools to ensure that there's resilience built, monitoring, tracking, as well in terms of initiatives that are undertaken. So yes, there is, uh, but how much money is really required in terms of the specific you mentioned about heat and humidity? I
Mhm.
think we need to put our heads together to understand what would be the exact number that could be an ask at the global level that will help India to really scale and strongly implement its heat action plans. Heat action plans themselves are at a varied level of implementation across the cities, and in with varied levels of performance of these plans. There is also conversation now on moving from these heat action plans to heat mitigation plans, because the way heat action plans was conceptualized was more about resilience and more about building the coping capacity and providing early warning messages to the population to help them prepare themselves for heat. So they were like preparatory plans. But moving these to more towards mitigation and more towards access to cooling solutions through a national heat mitigation framework is a conversation that is started. So we need to back this up with financing.
Mhm.
Uh, and as I mentioned, the loss and damage fund is one way of looking at it. Um, Other way, which has been historically been used under the Montreal Protocol, is being usually for the phase down of refrigerants
Mhm.
as part of the Montreal Protocol, and right now under the Kigali Amendment, phase down of hydrofluorocarbons. And there is allocated funding that enables the Annexure 5 countries, which are the developing countries, that are allocated based on their needs, financing that is required. So scaling that funding also, especially in the context of India, which has large cooling needs, and phasing down of these refrigerants would be extremely important
Mhm.
for the country. So those are some of the ways that one can really look at enhancing financing.
Wow. Okay. I mean, just the number that you shared with me of nearly $1.3 trillion required for cooling. That's quite an astronomical figure. But such are the times that we live in now. We are possibly in just beginning in the beginning stages of a new normal where extreme heat tends to be the reality rather than the exception.
Mhm,
So I think this is really important for us to work with the international partners in developing a really comprehensive but also practical implementation strategy for our heat action plans.
mhm.
Prima, again, thank you very much for your insights. I thought you raised a really good number of points. The information that you've given us through your insights, that's been excellent, and I'm sure that our listeners will have taken a lot of value out of this discussion. So I want to thank you again for making time for this podcast, and we hope to have you back on this series at some point in the future as well.
Thank you, Anirudh. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for all the efforts in bringing prominence to this topic and all the outreach that you all are doing. So I look forward to more conversations in this setup. Thank you.
Thank you very much.